Bizarre Reality Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir. Take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. Are you guys going to want to come build this?
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said, "There's a monster on the wall."
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
Welcome back, Bizarrites and Bizarre Society, to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some refer to as Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch. And alongside me, as per usual, I have the big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix.
You're my boy, Boo!
Daddy!
Ooh, yeah!
Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me yet again. And the Randy Savage at the end of that intro gets me every time. Like, I should know it's there by now, but it still just gets me.
Oh, that's a permanent piece, man. That's staying for every single show, no matter what. Like, that's going to be part of our trademark. You got to give a good homage to Randy Savage in the intro. I feel like that's a well-needed thing, man.
R.I.P.
And speaking of that, starting about an hour late, by the way. So for everybody that seems like we're kind of rushing as we're hopping into this, it's because we were definitely delayed due to some updates to Riverside. So I just want to take a quick moment to say fuck you, Riverside, for all the updates constantly, because you constantly make my job harder by thinking that you're making it easier. So please just leave stuff the same for a while.
Yeah, a lot of technical difficulties on my end tonight. So Shane, I want to publicly apologize to you, but we're trying to make the best out of this, trying to make a lemonade out of lemons here. So we'll do the best we can, and hopefully next week we're up and rolling at full strength.
Well, the good news is the show isn't that professional, so we don't have to work that hard to be a little bit better than maybe we usually are. So we're not setting the bar very high.
That is true. It's low bars to clear around here. So.
Exactly.
Getting on with the rest of the news in front of the house stuff. Our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries, our YouTube live show, will be Monday, July 6th. So you guys can come and celebrate your post-July 4th festivities with us. So it's going to be roughly 7:15 Eastern time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. And as always, you guys be sure to submit any questions, articles, clips, anything like that you want us to inquire about, and also join us during the chat during the show.
Also, a big thank you, by the way, to Kelly for sending in that last one that had a listener submitted clip. And I want to throw that out for everybody else, that we are more than happy to take in these listener submitted clips. So be like Kelly and submit a clip for us.
Absolutely. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show or sharing their experiences or basically just getting up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can get a hold of us through our email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com. You guys could also call or text the Bizarre Reality Media hotline 24/7, and that number is 313-364-1551. And for any professional inquiries, of course, you guys can get a hold of us at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And last but not least, if you guys have us on social media, that is definitely a viable way to get a hold of us, Instagram and Facebook. And if you guys happen to miss any of that, it is all available down in the link tree in the show description. And rolling into today's show, this is one that Orin put together, something that I'm kind of shocked that we haven't actually touched. We've kind of danced around it a little bit, but we haven't actually dived into it this deeply. So without further ado, Orin, why don't you let them know what we're getting into today, man?
Yes, so as all you guys probably know at this point from clicking on the episode and seeing the thumbnail, we're going to talk about Bob Lazar tonight. And like Shane said, this is something we've kind of had on our radar for a long time. But, it seems like this subject has really kind of been making the rounds here recently with that new documentary that just came out not so long ago. So I thought it was time for us to kind of put our 2 cents in on this one. And, after doing all the months of research for the Zodiac episode, I'm like, I'm just going to do Bob Lazar, something nice, simple, something I can just knock out easily. And that did not end up being the case.
Never
this
is
going to be another 2-parter for you guys. Once I got digging into this, I thought there was a lot more to talk about than just the surface level. A lot of this information I got from this book written by Bob Lazar himself. It's called Dreamland.
Straight from the horse's mouth, but not a better way to do it.
Exactly. So just kind of a bit of a disclaimer here. A lot of the information presented is going to be Bob Lazar's personal accounts of, his experiences. So just allegedly, that prefaces this entire episode, is all this is alleged. So Shayn, unless you got anything else, I'll go ahead and jump into the material.
Let's hop right in, man.
All right. So Robert Scott Lazar was born on January 26th, 1959 in Coral Gables, Florida. But he grew up on Long Island, New York with his adoptive parents. And as a child, he was fascinated by rockets and explosives. And as a teenager, he even worked for a fireworks manufacturer. And he experimented with building his own homemade rockets. So all of that sounds a lot like our boy Jack Parsons to me.
Really, really ironic how if you're into explosives and fire, it was totally cool from the time of the 50s to the 70s. You weren't a pyromaniac. You were just somebody who was going to get into rocketry. But as soon as we got to the 90s, you play with fire, that's a problem. You're a pyromaniac. No more rocketry for you guys.
You went from being a nerd to a juvenile delinquent.
Yeah, very quickly, right? They were like, all right, we already have enough scientists. We're good for now. We're going to cap it off here. Everybody else, we're not interested.
Yep. So in 1976, Lazar and his adoptive parents moved to California. And soon after, he enrolled at Pierce Junior College, which is located in Chatsworth, California. And while he was attending school, he worked for a company called Fairchild Electronics. And he claims that he designed circuit boards for them. And he also claims that at some point during this whole time period, he studied at Caltech. And that's something we're going to touch on a little bit in part 2. So just kind of keep that on the back burner. So in 1982, Lazar was offered a job at the Mason Physics Facility, which is located at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And this is just this huge laboratory that's home to one of the largest particle accelerators in the world. So nothing to see here. And according to Lazar, while he was working there, he worked on the, quote, electronics monitoring side of things, whatever that means. And he also claims that during this time period, he was sent to MIT to further his education. And again, we're going to talk about some of his education and kind of the controversy surrounding that in part 2. But this, I think, is kind of funny. Also in 1982, Lazar received a lot of local recognition around Los Alamos after he installed a jet engine in the back of his Honda Civic. And him and this jet car were actually featured in a front page article that ran in the June 27th edition of the Los Alamos Monitor newspaper. And Shayn, I've got a picture of that article if you want to pull that up and take a look at it.
Already got it up right here. Of course, that sounds absolutely fascinating. And where can I get one for myself?
Well, you got to be like Bob and just build your own.
Yeah, it seems like the only way you can get away with this stuff. The only problem is if you start messing with your car too much, you might draw some government attention, as it seems from the people that started trying to figure out how to get their cars to be powered by water.
Well, we're going to get into all sorts of government attention with our boy Bob as the episode goes on. All right. So jumping back in, after a while, Bob left his position at the Mason Physics Facility, allegedly because he had grown tired of working for someone else, he says. But I mean, I'm not sure what I think about that. You had the super prestigious, cool sciencey job and you quit because you didn't want to work for somebody else. But anyway, that's what he claims. And at that point, he started a company of his own called Lazar Energy Systems. And this company supposedly specialized in, quote, designing, developing, and repairing alpha radiation systems. And he even claims that they were awarded a pretty sizable government contract at one point. So, of course, no way to go back and fact check any of this, just with, all the kind of weirdness surrounding Bob and his kind of credentials and past, but kind of an odd claim to make, I think, if there's nothing to back that up.
I just want to make a comment too and say about the whole like working for someone else concept. Not that it's like super like weird or mysterious or anything like that, but like my biggest assumption would be when it comes to a lot of this type of research, what ends up happening is, you do research for like the company or you do research under the team of somebody. So if this guy is as advanced as he seems like he is and he wants to make a mark for himself, maybe the whole like not wanting to work for somebody else isn't so much as literal as that, but it's more so like being able to take the credit for things. Because if you're working under a company or under a team, then the company and the team is taking the credit. But if you're working for your own company, then you get the credit. Because I mean, even if you're a scientist working under like a more popular scientist, like they get the credit for all of the findings and not so much the team itself. It's usually referred to as like, oh, this scientist and his team. So I'm assuming it's just Bob Lazar wants credit for his findings.
I think that's actually a really good point. And as we get through this episode and part 2, we're going to touch on a lot of things that kind of play into that. I think like we're going to see that Bob has like not shied away from, the public and telling his story throughout the years. And it also seems like he kind of likes to be in control of his own working process. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point. And like I said, we're going to touch on a lot of that as we move forward. So kind of keep all those points in mind.
A lot of the out of the box thinkers are like that. So I'm assuming that's probably how his mind works. So.
All right. So also around the same time, he started a photo developing business with his first wife, whose name was Carol. But unfortunately, unfortunately, during this same time period, Carol took her own life after she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Oh, well, that escalated very quickly after making a joke about her name. Now I regret that.
Well, Bob also escalated really quickly because he soon married his second wife, whose name was Tracy, and she was an employee of the photo developing business. So, his one wife, tragically passes away, and he just swoops right in and marries one of his employees.
Dabbling around shitting where he eats, apparently.
Maybe so. But the thing that's interesting about his second wife, Tracy, is that her father also worked at Los Alamos in the past. So kind of some weird connections there.
Almost like in a weird way, like even before they were dating, like it almost kind of makes you wonder if there was some like interest, not necessarily in like dating right away, but like if he was interested in her being an employee because of her connections is kind of what I'm getting at.
Or vice versa. Is there some sort of maybe government connection or whatnot that she has? I mean, there's a lot of ways you could go with that.
Yeah, like they were watching him just because of the interest in what he's already doing. See, this is what I'm talking about, man. All it took was just making a jet-propelled car, and all of a sudden you got government attention, man.
Absolutely.
Don't touch that water, though. That's a no-go. You will disappear.
All right, Shane, you have anything else to add before we jump into our next section?
No, you can hop right in, sir.
All right. So in January of 1989, Bob had been away from like the scientific field for like 4 years at that point. So he decided that he wanted to get back into like the more nerdy science side of things. So he applied for a senior staff physicist position with a defense contractor called EG&G. And that stands for Edgerton Gershwin or Germichon, I think is how it would be pronounced, and Greer.
I definitely see why they use the letters instead of the full names.
Yeah, that second name's a bit of a doozy.
I also see why they add an "and" in there instead of just leaving it EGG.
Yeah,
egg.
All right, so this company EG&G, they were known for conducting research and development on nuclear weapons. And their special projects division was based out of a military installation located in the Nevada desert known as S4. And this whole like site area base compound thing is also known as Dreamland, the name of Bob Lazar's book, Groom Lake, and also Dun 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 Area 51.
Dun Dun Dun.
As you can see in the picture that you've got pulled up there, that's kind of like someone's schematic of this whole area. So you can see like Area 51 is supposedly part of this whole like area compound, whatnot. There's the different lakes, and then S4, where he supposedly worked, is kind of at the heart of this whole area.
What the heck?
Literally, like direct path to Area 51. Like, if they were working on any type of flight, anything, like that's literally like an inch away if you're really thinking about it in that dynamic.
Yeah, it's like in the same little valley. I mean, ostensibly, you'd have to think all this stuff and all these facilities are basically connected and exchanging information and all working on the same type of shit at that point. I
mean, theoretically, you get into the underground things, and I mean, that is the closest next thing. So if there are underground passages, they probably will be connecting to these very close places.
Well, and something we're going to talk about in a few minutes leads me to believe that there probably is underground passages.
Well, you got to have escapes, of course, especially if you're working on nuclear power.
Yeah. All right. So during like the interview process, quote unquote, with EG&G, Lazar met a man named Dennis Mariani. And he met this guy at the McCarran International Airport, which is located in Las Vegas. And they boarded a Janet Airlines flight. And anyone who's into like Area 51 and all those kind of conspiracy theories have probably heard about Janet Airlines. It's supposedly this airline that transports people from this airport in Las Vegas to Area 51. And as you can see from the picture you've got pulled up there, these planes are distinctive, and they're white Boeing 737 jets with distinctive red markings. So there you go.
Is this one of the ones that you can add those back, like drop passages out of the back? Is that the one I'm thinking of? There's that one specialty plane that we were talking about that like the cartels and everything like that would like purposely steal, and like Epstein was like stealing these planes. I forgot what they were called. There's like a specific name for I thought it was a Boeing, but it's the ones that have like the stairs that drop down in the back.
Yeah,
and the whole.
Yeah, we talked about that in our DB Cooper episode, but I don't remember the specific model of airplane that it was. I mean, all these airplane models kind of run together. I'm not an aviation expert by any means.
Not that it would make that big of a. Not that it'd be anything like that big or crazy. I just figured that at that point they'd be able to do easier drops into that area. But assumably they're probably straight like flying in, and this is like a private jet that will like land there, kind of come back and pretend like it never even stopped there, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So anyway, Bob Lazar and this Dennis fellow, they got on this flight and they flew to this S4 location. And when they arrived at S4, they boarded a school bus that had blacked out windows. And they were taken to what appeared to be just like a normal single-story office building. And when they entered the building, Dennis instructed Bob to start like filling out this large stack of documents and paperwork that was required for his security clearance. And what's interesting about this is he had to have like the highest possible level of security clearance for this job. And it was known as a majestic level security clearance. And I think that's really interesting in light of like the majestic 12 and all that. So just a lot to unpack there.
They're just hidden in plain sight, You're not looking at the majestic 12. That's just the security clearance that you have. We don't exist. That group doesn't exist. You're just mixing up words.
Yeah, nothing to see here.
Never anything to see here.
So at the same time, Lazar was informed that he would be working on like a provisional basis until the security clearance was approved and came back. And so that meant that like periodically, just out of the blue, he would receive telephone calls like telling him when and where to show up for work. So he's basically just like on call until his security clearance came back. So after several hours of filling out these documents and like all this personal information, Dennis came in and told him that he was free to go. And he rode the school bus, back to the Janet Airlines plane and took it back to Las Vegas and returned home. So do you have anything else to add at this point, Shane?
I'm curious if he's like aware of like what they're trying to like push him into. Like, I feel like he's just kind of going through this like, oh yeah, I'm getting a new job as this new thing. But I don't think they like, he realizes yet like the weirdness of how high this like level of security is coming in. Like maybe you just think it's standard for like the military or something, but like clearly this is like a whole other level.
Well, he soon figures that out, and that is what we're going to get into after this commercial break.
We apologize, guys, for the interference, but we will be right back. And now back to the show.
All right. So a few days later, Lazar received a phone call instructing him to report for work. And so this time when he arrived at S4, he and Dennis got on the same, blacked out school bus. And this is pretty interesting. They were taken to a large hill in the middle of the Nevada desert. And carved into the side of this hill was a small door. And so Dennis opened this door, and they went basically inside this hill, mountain, whatever you want to call it, into this like well-lit industrial corridor. And Dennis led Bob Lazar down the corridor, and they went into just what appeared to be like a small waiting room. And there was a receptionist that then took Lazar into an adjoining room where he like underwent this medical examination. And they actually told him that they were testing to see if he was allergic to, quote, exotic materials, which is pretty interesting. And they also made him drink a strange, quote, faint yellowish liquid. So who knows what this guy underwent during this medical examination.
Flushing him out or making it so he's immune to whatever he's supposed to be immune to. Like, kind of curious what the yellow liquid may have been if there wasn't any, like,
something to track him or, like, who knows at this point.
I mean, especially if you're working at, like, that government level. I mean, who knows what they might potentially have for technology. And if you're at that level, I feel like, they could always put like one of the chip trackers in, but then you're aware of it. They just make you drink a liquid on your first day in. There's just some kind of a little microchip that gets like lodged somewhere in your body, man. Like, that's horrifying.
Yeah. So after this medical examination, Dennis was taken into another room. And in this room, there's like a desk and chair with a large stack of file folders sitting on it. And at this point, Dennis told Lazar that he needed to be brought up to speed on like the history and the objectives of the project. And he left him to like begin reading through these documents. And some of the documents stated that the purpose of the project, which was codenamed Project Galileo, was to reverse engineer the propulsion systems from extraterrestrial crafts. So this is where I think Bob kind of started to understand the full scope of what he had gotten himself into. Like you said earlier, I think at first he was kind of, just thinking he was working on this science project. And then, at this point, he was like, oh, there might be something more going on here.
It took him that long after bringing him through a rock hole, pushing him through some type of medical exam, pushing him into a well-lit room with nothing in it but a chair and a stack of files. And then finally they say, oh, we're going to be working on extraterrestrial stuff. And he's like, oh, okay, something weird is happening here. Like that didn't start back when they brought you through the rock hole? Like, what?
Nothing to see here.
This is normal.
All right, so as he continued reading through these documents, it kind of became clear that this project had been going on for quite some time and that there had been several previous unsuccessful attempts to reproduce these propulsion systems. And he also kind of figured out that there are several different divisions within this Project Galileo. Like there's the propulsion division and the division that made like the body of the ship, and then like the navigation division, like all these different sections were working on different parts of the craft.
Breaking it apart so not everybody knows the full scope of everything.
Exactly. It was strictly prohibited for the members of the different divisions to work together or exchange information. And even in like the cafeteria, the people on the project were quarantined kind of to like their own groups. Like you weren't allowed to like even ask somebody from another group for like the salt shaker or anything like that.
It almost kind of makes you wonder like where the extent of like watching that might be. Like if you go home theoretically and you know these people outside of work, or you've seen one of them or somewhere, like it almost kind of makes you wonder like what their level of security is. Like if they're watching people to make sure nobody's interacting outside of the building, if maybe that yellow liquid will make it so that if they notice two GPS systems get too close together, they can be like, like there's got to be some type of precaution that they're watching people outside of leaving this facility too, if they're that strict at the facility.
We're going to get into that a little bit, so keep that one on the back burner as well.
You're being watched everywhere you go. Dun, dun, dun.
So one of the folders that was in this stack was labeled biology. And the documents in this folder stated that the extraterrestrials who built the craft came from the star system Zeta Reticuli. And anyone that, has looked at all into UFOs and aliens and things like that have heard of Zeta Reticuli. It shows up time and time again and all sorts of like UFO lore and stories and reports and whatnot. It's big in the Betty and Barney Hill case, so I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard that mentioned before.
Just the connection with already Bob Lazar and Betty and Barney Hill with the whole Zeta Reticuli connection. Mm-hmm. It almost kind of makes you wonder if like Betty and Barney Hill we tore apart, and at least my standing currently, and I'm always happy to change my opinion, but my standing currently is I think that one was one of these human done abductions, so to speak. So, you know, if that is the case, that this one, and then Bob Lazar obviously is working on these crafts that are like reverse engineered and everything like that, it almost kind of makes you wonder if Zeta Reticuli might be some type of like code word for like, you know, like our projects or stuff that we're working on or something like that, or like, you know, experiments of whatever. Like, I almost feel like it might be one of those words that if you like mixed everything up a little bit, it might actually like come up to something else, and it actually might be one of like the calling cards for maybe one of these like human type interactions.
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something there. A lot of my thoughts about that I'm going to save for part 2 with like thoughts and theories and conclusions and things like that. But I had very similar thoughts going through this. Just like the different cases that seems to pop up in are kind of these ones that you're like, maybe there's something else other than aliens and UFOs going on here. So I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up.
In Zeta Reticuli versus a lot of the other ones you hear, it just sounds like something that's straight up out of like a sci-fi book. It doesn't sound...
Yeah, it sounds very made up.
Yeah, it sounds extremely made up versus a lot of the other names that you hear, like even like Greys, Nordics, like all these other names. Then it's like Zeta Reticuli, like it straight up sounds like somebody made it up for like a sci-fi book.
Absolutely. So also in these folders, there are photographs of what Bob described as a humanoid organism. And in one of these photos, it appeared to be like this being's torso, and it had like grayish white skin, and it had this long incision running down the torso, and like the skin had been pulled back. And inside the torso, you could see, quote, an undifferentiated mass of tissue where the organs on a human would have been. And
what the hell is even that?
Yeah. Kind of makes you also wonder, you know, is this real? Was this a staged photo? Is this just like misdirection, them trying to get this guy to believe that he's working on extraterrestrial crafts and, you know, these extraterrestrial beings? So a lot to unpack there as well, I think.
I mean, the alien autopsy idea seemed like it was like a very popular idea as far as like, I guess you could say like dark web, stuff like that for a while, like especially during the 90s, early 2000s and stuff. But it seems like a lot of it died off for whatever reason. I mean, a lot of those videos, of course, were like deemed as like fake and stuff like that. But there's a few of them that people were really starting to tear apart. They were actually starting to like figure out that there was people that actually worked at bases. They were connecting names on different like name tags and everything in some of these videos. So it seems like all of a sudden there was this big attention to these like alien autopsy videos, and all of a sudden it just kind of like disappeared for a while. But I definitely think that the alien autopsy videos are one of those perfect things that you could stage very easily, especially back in this time with the grainy photos, all that kind of stuff. So regardless of if it was real or not, I think that there was still intention behind it and intention in creating it, even for the sake of just even like soft disclosure almost, that if there's this stuff kind of working in the background and military guys are kind of talking about it, you're kind of like in the background, like semi-normalizing that concept possibly for some of these military guys. So I think it's like the first step of disclosure would be to partially like disclose it to like the military, and then the next step would be to slowly disclose it to the public. But I think the autopsy idea is a good way to like disclose it to like military members who you think might actually be actively working on this stuff at some point soon.
Yeah, and you know, this is something we've talked about in previous episodes. I think like the Rendlesham Forest case, where like the government and the military is like such an integral part of the case and the story, like from the beginning. You have to take all this with a grain of salt, because there's just so many different levels and so many different places all this could go. Because all this could be on the up and up, and this could be, you know, real flesh and blood extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli, but just as easily this could all be government smoke screens just trying to trick the workers and, you know, the employees and the soldiers into thinking something that's not true. And then you got your whole government and human intervention angle. So like I said, like whenever the government and the military is this actively involved in a case, you got to take everything with a grain of salt, I think.
I mean, even just to throw this one in real quick before we keep moving on, if you remember like a year or so ago, there was that whole thing where the FBI was supposedly like, or CIA, I don't remember who it was exactly, where they're disclosing documents saying that a lot of the Roswell stuff was actually like propaganda that they were putting out. So, I mean, if that is theoretically true, but I mean, that could also be something just to muddy the waters. But if that is theoretically true, then that just adds more validity to the idea that they're staging things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so jumping back in, after Lazar finished reading the contents of all these file folders, Dennis then came in and took him into the propulsion laboratory. And he introduced him to a guy named Barry Castillo, who was going to be his work partner.
Every time I hear
Barry
propulsion,
showed-
all I think of is Jack Parsons now. So thank you for that one.
Yeah.
Every time I hear the word propulsion.
Parsons-esque stuff in this one. But Barry showed Lazar what appeared to be, quote, a cylinder about the size and shape of a household garbage can. And the cylinder was pewter in color. It had no visible seams or welds. And Barry said that this was the emitter for the propulsion system. And he then showed him, quote, a half sphere of the same color and material. It was roughly the size of a basketball and set on a 1-inch plate made out of the same material. And within the half sphere was, quote, a small tower-shaped object. And Barry said that this was the reactor. And Barry placed a small triangle-shaped disc on top of this tower, and he said that that was the fuel disc. And I know that's a lot of word salad, so I've got a picture here of Bob Lazar himself with like models of, all these components of the propulsion system.
It almost kind of seems like, I don't know, I'm always going back to this idea. I'm thoroughly convinced that all of this shit runs on magnetism. Even going into like the whole idea of being able to like open up wormholes if you're using that for this type of stuff. Like we're really diving into that with the whole thing about like, those the volcano caverns and stuff like that I was talking about in those areas a long time ago, and the fact that they were basically like circular caverns that were magnetic. Like I'm thoroughly convinced that the way that most of this stuff works is through magnetism. And the reason why we haven't figured it out is because like, yes, we've spent time with magnetism, but we've never like deemed it as that important. So I think it's one of those things that it's like, now we're really discovering like what you can potentially do with magnetism, but maybe they've known that the whole time, and that's why they kind of just like push people away from not really like diving too far into that for an aspect of propulsion, so to speak. Because it's like you see all those videos online with people creating those like the cars where there's like a little magnet glued to the front, and then there's another magnet on like a board that's above it, and it basically creates this like infinite power because it's constantly like pulling itself. Like there's so much potential with magnetism. So why is it that we're not seeing these like giant movements in, like magnetism with, propulsion and things? Like, I think it's because they've known this whole time. They also know that it's almost like a free way of creating power. And potentially, if you gear it up too much, I mean, who knows what the potential capabilities of it could be as far as like, again, ripping open wormholes and possibly being able to travel through like stargates,
Yeah, well, and we're going to get into some of Bob's kind of thoughts and theories on what he thought, powered these propulsion systems and these different components. But yeah, I think, magnetism is something we come back to time and time again on the show, and it affects so many of the different topics we talk about. And like you said, it seems like something we just don't either fully grasp yet or, aren't allowed to grasp yet. But what's kind of interesting about this is, after Bob was shown this emitter and the reactor and all these different components, he reached his hand out toward the reactor, and it was, quote, pushed back by some unseen force. And according to Barry, which was, Bob's partner, he said that this unseen force was actually anti-gravity. And Bob described this as, quote, a hypothetical force by which a body of positive mass would repel a body of negative mass. So then Barry took this golf ball and he tossed it like into the anti-gravity field. And as soon as it like entered the field, it shot straight up vertically like into the ceiling, and like debris from the like acoustical ceiling panels rained down on them. And it was this whole thing. And for his next demonstration, Barry took off his mechanical wristwatch and placed it next to the emitter. And at that point, the watch's hands suddenly froze, and they did not resume until it was taken away from the emitter. And how many times in UFO, encrypted, and all sorts of high strangeness cases do we talk about like people's watches malfunctioning? So, if this is true, this is a pretty good feather in the cap of, oh, well, when this sort of technology and these things are around, people's watches stop working.
I mean, that's one of those things, too, that it's like, it clearly shows that there's even more that goes into it, meaning that, like, these ships, whatever they are, whatever this magnetic force is, whatever this force is that's, like, manipulating these things, it shows that it's not just flying like how we would normally assume that it's flying, but it is, like, literally, like, altering reality around it, which, if you're looking at it from that context and how fast these things can fly, if you can essentially get rid of all drag because you're essentially, like, almost like have, like, a almost like a force field around you, so to speak, then if there's no drag, like you can essentially go in whatever direction, bounce any direction you potentially want to shift and move into. Like it just kind of goes further into how this technology could potentially work by proving that, again, these create almost like these rift fields.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a perfect segue into our next section here, because Lazar theorized that the reactor and the emitter were like somehow able to create their own gravitational field, which could like push or pull the craft in any direction. So like you said, it wasn't like traveling in any traditional sense like we think of it. It was more like beaming from place to place. And he theorized that the reactor and the emitter were actually capable of like bending light, which was possible because, quote, gravity can effectively bend space and time, meaning that anything in its field is also distorted, and that includes light. So yeah, kind of like you were just saying, like when you have this technology, it opens all these avenues for travel that, you know, we can't even comprehend. And a lot of people who, you know, oh, how can the aliens get here? Think about it in this term of, well, they're getting, you know, behind the steering wheel of their nuts and bolts spacecraft, and they're like driving from their planet to Earth, and that's not what's happening at all. So I think a lot of these kind of explanations go a long way to explaining those type of issues.
Just out of curiosity, were you a Futurama fan? Did you watch Futurama?
Not really.
So they talk about how the ship functions, and this is what I want to bring up, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. The ship itself, like their main ship they fly on the show, runs off of dark matter, right? So because it runs off of dark matter, basically the way they say the ship works is that the ship itself does not move. The ship itself stays stationary, but it says it moves everything around it, which is like a crazy thing to be able to like think about. But like theoretically, I mean, that could almost be like how this technology works in a weird way.
Yeah.
Like these things are staying inside the ship and not being blown into a million different pieces from that speed, because what if it's almost like if reality is malleable and bendable, like the ship essentially stays in the same place and everything shifts and moves around it. Like getting into some weird soft disclosure stuff, because I mean, Futurama was created by obviously the same guy who created The Simpsons, and there's constantly conspiracies about like, you know, disclosure and stuff like that coming out in The Simpsons. So there's a lot of stuff in Futurama that weirdly enough links up with a lot of our research, and I think that it was intentional too.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, I can't believe that there's something that like cutting edge almost that was put into a cartoon from, you know, 20 years ago. I mean, we're just now starting to talk about like dark matter and wormholes and, you know, E equals MC squared type shit. So that's pretty crazy.
Right. And they're already talking about basically this concept, this little tiny ball of dark matter is like weighs like 1 trillion pounds. So they have to use like special machinery to be able to pick up these like little tiny balls of like dark matter and shit. So again, it's like ahead of their time, man, like constantly with The Simpsons and all of this soft disclosure through cartoons, man. Like I feel like there's probably a lot more Easter eggs in Futurama if I go back through and watch it now.
All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the Bazaar. All right, so jumping back in, Lazar continued to kind of work on this provisional on-call basis. But on the second night that he was called into work, Dennis took him into like one of the hangars located on the base. And inside the hangar was what Lazar described as a like cylindrical craft. And he said it basically like just resembled a stereotypical like flying saucer. But it's interesting, he specifically pointed out that he suspected that this was some sort of like experimental military craft, because he said that it had like American flags and all sorts of like military markings on it. So kind of interesting. Another point kind of pointing towards the whole government intervention, human intervention theory.
Also throwing in the possibility of, you know, the whole like Project Paperclip concept, you know, they're working on the Die Glock, you know, like the Nazi bell and everything. A lot of those people probably got picked off and are in other countries doing scientific experiments there. So, I mean, if that is the case, I mean, this is almost like a direct correlation that more than likely some of the people, if the Die Glock is real, some of those people probably got brought in onto this project because it seems very similar in design and, you know, characteristics.
And this is, you know, the late 80s. At that point, you know, they could have been working on this shit for 40 years, you know?
Yeah, that's the other thing that people got to think about, too, is like, we're looking at saucers, and you're looking back at like the Die Glock in the 1940s. Saucers start becoming a thing in what, like 50s, 60s, that kind of area. So I mean, like, we could just literally be looking at like the next generation of the same technology, and people are saying this doesn't look like this, but it's like, yeah, you didn't see the 10 steps that were in between that. You know, you're only seeing like every 10 years you might end up getting a glimpse of these things, but they still seem like further on models of the same thing essentially.
Yeah, I mean, because like the whole Kenneth Arnold flying saucers thing, that was 47, just a couple weeks before Roswell. So yeah, I mean, they had decades to kind of advance this technology and reverse engineer and whatever they were doing. So I mean, there's no telling what advances were made in that time period.
And I mean, even theoretically speaking, too, how they say that, like, once technology speeds up, it continuously speeds up. Like, we're going to be a lot more advanced in 5 years than, they would have advanced like 100 years ago in 100 years.
Yeah.
So it's like, if we're looking at these, like, advanced races of beings, like extraterrestrials, for example, like, I'm assuming that their spacefaring technology probably updates so fast that it's almost like every single time we have an interaction with them, they already have completely updated technology. So if you're constantly seeing these saucers from the 40s till now and you're still seeing saucers, my best assumption is that those probably are not extraterrestrials, because if they are that much more advanced than us, they're like way past those models. And the only way that it could be extraterrestrials is if you got some of the clunker scrappers around, which I mean is definitely possible. But, my best guess is that a lot of these saucers that we're seeing, which my guess was always the triangles, but correlating with this also, probably some of these saucers are probably all government related, and some of these like light objects and all these like weird ones that we can't quite explain right now that we're dealing with. My assumption is those are probably the updated extraterrestrial crafts. Like, they don't need the mechanicals anymore if they're traveling in fucking light,
Yeah. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And, that's something I've kind of said on the show before is I absolutely think, there are extraterrestrial beings. I absolutely think they have visited us in the past and, continue to visit us. But I think those visitations are kind of few and far between. And I think most of the things at this point that we kind of classify as a UFO sighting or an extraterrestrial visitation or anything like that, a lot of them probably are some sort of government technology that's either misunderstood or straight up masquerading as this extraterrestrial technology. So I think you're absolutely correct there.
And I mean, even going into like the whole like drone aspect where, like a lot of like the gray interactions almost kind of seem like they're like astral projected drones and things like that. Again, if the technology is that updated and people are having more of these like less physical experience with extraterrestrials and more of these like, for lack of a better term, like ethereal or like spiritual experiences with these extraterrestrials, I mean, I think that those ones are some of the legitimate ones, because again, like our warfare would update to the point where it's like, back in like, once we get to a point where we can essentially run on all drones, why would we be sending any physical people to this place anymore? And if we're already thinking that as a human race, if we're having a race that's way more advanced than us, I'm sure that they've thought about that thousands of years ago, and a lot of the stuff that we're interacting with is either not them physically, or they have ways of projecting themselves here to be able to interact with things, because it's essentially like an updated idea of like a drone concept. It's because again, why would you send yourself physically here or take any of those risks if you have the option to not do that?
No, that makes perfect sense to me. And, it kind of hits on a lot of points we've heard and we've talked about like, the grays not seeming like real biological entities and almost like robots or something like that. So yeah, a lot to unpack there and a lot of good points that I think, like I said, harken back to a lot of things we've talked about on the show before.
I mean, theoretically, too, if these things have these telepathic abilities that we're constantly talking about with almost every single interaction with them, it doesn't seem that far off that these things might be able to create a biological vessel and basically just be able to, like, put their mind in it and pull it out whenever they want to.
Like Avatar? Yeah,
almost like an Avatar type concept. And maybe all these grays, everything that we're dealing with is basically these avatars. And the whole idea is if the ship blows up, anything like that, like any of these physical bodies that the government has maybe collected, like there's no consciousness to them. It's literally just like a like a meat suit essentially, because
or like Bob said from the picture, undifferentiated mass of tissue.
Yeah, exactly. Once there's not a consciousness in it, it's just, it's nothing. It's just, it's like a car without a battery.
Yeah, just a vessel. Yeah. All right. So jumping back in, through all their experimentation, Lazar and Barry were able to determine that the reactor and the emitter were kind of like turned on by placing them just in close proximity to one another. and that the propulsion system only functioned when like the fuel disk was put on top of the tower and like introduced to this whole mechanism. And they also determined, and I think this is really interesting and something we're going to talk about a little bit more in part 2, but they determined that the individual components of the propulsion system were all made out of the same unknown element. So keep that in mind. A lot of you listeners probably know where we're going with this. Shane, I'm sure you do, but we're going to touch some more on that in part 2.
I almost was going to say it, but I'm going to leave it for part 2 because I figured that you were trying to do a little bit of a teaser.
Yep, absolutely. So they also figured out that this propulsion system seemed to produce some sort of like 100% efficient nuclear reaction. So that means that it didn't produce any sort of heat or noise or like leakage or anything like that. And Lazar said that this like violated the laws of thermodynamics, as we understand them. So basically, long story short, all the parts of this propulsion system were made out of this element that they didn't know what it was, didn't understand where it came from, and it behaved in this manner that, violated our laws of nature that as they understood them.
I mean, looking at that, who's to even say that there are laws of nature? It's just a matter of how you understand them,
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's one of the hardest things in science is that you think that you discover, like, a law of nature, and that's something that's, like, indefinite, can never possibly change. And then as soon as you start digging into things, you realize that, like, the rate that something falls is different on a different planet. It's different here. So it's like none of these rules are stationary. It's just like time, that we have this idea that it's like everything is like, this is how it is because we're humans and we've said this is how it is. But realistically, like, all these rules of reality are only created by us humans because that's how we understand them. But again, most of the time, as soon as you learn how to bend a rule, that rule doesn't really work anymore. So, I mean, no different with a lot of this stuff, man. It kind of shows that the best thing to do is realize that you know absolutely nothing.
Yeah, they're all just theories until proven otherwise.
Exactly.
But so one day, Dennis came into the lab and he told Lazar and Barry that additional fuel disks needed to be manufactured. And he was going to send Lazar to the Los Alamos National Laboratory to deliver like the instructions and the raw materials needed to make these new fuel disks. So Dennis provided him with one of the remaining fuel disks, kind of like they were using for their experimentations. And he also gave him, quote, a cylindrical ingot of the same material. And again, at this point, Lazar and Barry still didn't fully understand what this material was. So when Lazar arrived at Los Alamos, he met with like one of the supervisors of the machine shop, and he like oversaw the whole process of manufacturing these new fuel disks. When he got back to S4 with these new fuel disks, they worked and behaved in the same way as the old ones. And so him and Barry just kept on like experimenting and kept doing their same work. But they began to increasingly grow frustrated with like this whole process and like the strict secrecy and the compartmentalization around the project. And actually, at one point, they got so frustrated, they went to Dennis and they told him that, like, not knowing how the propulsion system functioned within, like, the larger context of the spacecraft was, like, really causing their work to slow down and be, like, unnecessarily inefficient. So do you have anything else to add before I go on to the next section?
Just the whole idea about compartmentalizing to the point where it's like they really don't want anybody to know shit. So they're just like, yeah, I don't care if it's affecting your work. We see the broader picture, so that doesn't really affect you. Just figure it the fuck out and we'll deal with it from there. Like, that kind of goes into the whole aspect of like, how did this Bob Lazar story even get out if they were like that adamant about all of this type of shit? Like, not to get into like theories and everything too early, but like, is it possibly intentional that this whole story came out? Because again, if they had this level of security for all of this, like, I don't understand how some dude just happens to, get the story out.
Yeah, there's no adverse consequences.
Yeah, other than, making him disappear. But I don't want to get into that too far because I don't want to ruin the second part 2, because I'm assuming we're going to get into that whole thing in part 2. But I was going to say, they tried, but again, it's like, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but with a lot of other people, they start causing ripples and they just outright disappear. With this guy, they're kind of like, we're going to make your identity disappear, but they didn't make him disappear. Like, that's just a little weird,
Oh, and he's been like very public about all this information for going on 40 years at this point. So yeah, there's definitely some thoughts and theories about that I think will hit pretty hard in part 2.
See, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but yeah, you already know where I'm kind of getting with this one. This is Bob Lazar is a very two-sided story. It's like you really want to believe it, but on the other side, it's like you always have to have your doubts in the back of your mind because yeah, you just never trust the government, man.
Yeah. So speaking of never trusting the government, around this same time, Lazar also began to notice that there's this suspicious car that was like always parked across the street from his house.
Good old black Suburbans.
It would just be parked there for like hours at a time. And as he began noticing this car, he noticed that there was always 2 men dressed in dark colored suits, white shirts, and sunglasses that were in this car. So, just classic Men in Black shit right there. But obviously, these are more of the government Men in Black, not the ultra-terrestrial John Keel type Men in Black.
Why don't we have 2 name differentiations for that? That always drives me crazy. When you're talking about like Men in Black, it's like, oh no, it's not those ones. And it's like, no, I'm talking about the other ones. Like, we have a million different names for each individual cryptid. Why don't we have 2 differentiating names for Men in Black versus like government Men in Black?
Oh, maybe we need to get on that.
Yeah, we should create that. We should be the podcast that creates that name. We'll come up with a good one. Because government Men in Black just doesn't hit right.
GMIB.
There you go. GMIB. There you go. GIMIB.
There you go. So as Bob Lazar started like noticing these guys parked across the street, he began to kind of speculate that they were monitoring him and his activity as part of like the whole approval process for his security clearance. And kind of piggybacking off of that, at one point, 2 different guys showed up at his house, and they claimed to be from the Office of Federal Investigation. And they did like this extensive search of his house, just like basically, tore his house up from top to bottom. And they said that, they were searching for anything incriminating and that this is all part of the approval process for his security clearance. So a lot of weird stuff kind of starts happening in Bob's personal life at this point.
My assumption on that one would be they're like, all right, this guy's asking about other projects. What's going on with other projects? I think what they're looking for is to make sure that he's not interacting with people outside of work, like what I was saying, to try to get this information, because scientists, they know how their mind works, man. If there's a problem that's driving them absolutely fucking crazy, fuck the regulations. They're going to find a way to figure it out. So I think that that's what they're worried about with him, is that they see that he's kind of been like, I'm going to go my own path and figure it the fuck out. So if they don't watch him, he's going to start looking into other aspects of the project. And I think that's what they're looking out for.
Well, in part 2, we're going to get into some of the possible reasons that these guys could have been watching him and like searching his house and whatnot. And it gets pretty crazy. So we're going to kind of punt that one to next week's episode.
Good old GIMIBs.
Yep.
I like that
on the back burner.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in.
All right. So jumping back in, eventually Dennis kind of conceded and he allowed Lazar and Barry to not only examine one of the crafts up close, but he was also going to let them observe a low performance test flight. So on the night of the test flight, Dennis took them to a hangar that housed 9 of these crafts of various sizes. And the craft that they were allowed to examine up close, they said was like smaller and sleeker than the other ones. So Lazar and Barry began referring to it as the sport model, which I'm sure, a lot of people who are familiar with Bob and his story, they've heard him talk about the sport model. That's why they called it that.
Love it. Would not have more fitting name. That's exactly what I would have called it too.
So anyway, according to Bob, this sport model craft was dark aluminum in color, approximately 20 feet tall, 50 feet in diameter, and it appeared to be made out of like one solid piece of material. It wasn't like it was like fixed together or welded together or anything like that. It was almost like it was like carved out of one piece of this material.
Just something to think about, by the way, because I don't know if it ever actually specifies this in any of this stuff that we've been diving into as far as these like reverse engineered UFOs. Does it say like how many people are intended to fit in this thing? Like, is it supposed to be like a couple different people? Is it a single person one? Yeah, I've always been curious about that because I don't feel like really much dives into how many people or things these things are supposed to carry.
So kind of piggybacking off of that to that point, Lazar was allowed to go inside of the craft. And he said that based off of the interior dimensions, he estimated that like the beings who piloted it were approximately, quote, the size of a 6 or 7 year old human. And he said that the craft appeared to be made out of the same material on the interior that it was the exterior. So again, kind of just all carved out of one block of the same material. And he said that it had 3 like floors or levels to it. And the lowest level contained multiple seats. I think he said there were 3 of them. And again, these seats were like molded directly into the body of the craft. And they appeared to have like no safety or life support or navigation systems or anything like that. They were just like chairs molded into the body of the craft.
Just to throw in another weird correlation, Alien came out in what, 1978 or something?
78, 79,
something like that. And when it shows the engineer ship in the very beginning of it, kind of the same setup. There's no like straps in the seats. It's all just kind of like welded in as like one piece and stuff like that. Like, I don't know if that's something that's just naturally in the human psyche, but why is it that when we think of like human created ships, it's like multiple pieces put together to create one thing. But whenever you see alien ships in sci-fi, no matter what it is, it's always made out of like one solid piece of something. Like, that has to be some type of, like I said, is either something subconscious that the humans naturally do, or it's some type of like disclosure. But why is it that like...
It's an idea that was planted.
Yeah, exactly. It's like an idea that was planted, because I can't think of any like alien sci-fi movie where it's like shows the inside of the ship that it's like different component pieces. It's always made all together when it's the alien ship.
Yeah, like slick and futuristic and all white and clean and sterile and, you know, all that good stuff.
Or almost like the reverse of that. Like, it almost kind of has this like feel of like almost like a like an ancient like monolith or something like that, you know, where it almost kind of looks like it's all like stone and stuff like that almost. Like, they kind of do like one or the other, but like the whole like monolith look is almost kind of like what I'm imagining with this is like the dark, solid one piece, like, you know, almost kind of looks like trying to think about like Event Horizon, like the way that they kind of made stuff look in that almost, where it's just like this dark, solid one piece, like slate look.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even like the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And, you know, that gets into a lot of weird Stanley Kubrick type stuff. So yeah, definitely some interesting thoughts about that.
By the way, little cool side note, they apparently are bringing that back to theaters at some point soon, and they're supposed to be making a special bucket for it. That's Stanley Kubrick's camera. So I think I need to get one of those for myself.
Add that to your collection.
Add that to my collection, like this awesome Back to the Future car right here, sir.
There you go.
Not very practical as a popcorn bucket, though.
But it's super badass.
But it is badass.
All right. So jumping back in on the second level of this spacecraft, that was what housed the propulsion system. So like the emitter and the reactor and the fuel disk and everything that we talked about earlier. But interestingly, Lazar was not allowed to go on the third level, which kind of makes you wonder what was actually on the third level. But I've got a photo of like this drawing or schematic or whatever that Bob drew of kind of this craft and how it was laid out. If you want to bring that up, Shane.
So yeah, I've always been kind of curious on like how these ships are set up, because again, you hear the stories, you know that there's multiple components, you know there's multiple rooms to these things, but you never really see that like, you know, that cut in half look of like what they look like on the inside. It's kind of like you get the pieces and then you try to like figure out how it would all kind of like structure together. But I'm glad that he was able to kind of split this one up. But that being said, also the third level, the fact that they were keeping that all secret and hidden and stuff like that, my assumption would be that that is probably the room where they do like experiments, you know, like the abduction room, so to speak, because I feel like a lot of the time when people talk about like the abduction room, they make references to like having windows and stuff like that where they can see space outside of these abduction rooms. And if that is the case, I mean, look at the ship. The only spot where there's really windows is up in that top portion that he's not allowed to go into. So
yeah, it definitely makes you wonder, you know, what was going on that third level that they wouldn't allow him access to it. Like if they're showing him all this other shit, like it had to be something pretty crazy, because why would you not just let him see it at that point?
I mean, considering the compartmentalization, my best guess would be that it has something to do not at all with propulsion. That's how they're seeing it.
Yeah.
Like this is all extraterrestrial medical equipment. Like this isn't your field. This doesn't pertain to you. This does not matter to you.
Or who knows what.
Yeah, like we don't even want you to look at this because it doesn't even pertain to you. Like this is like a whole other field that these people looking into this aren't even in this building. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that would be my best guess.
That's a good point. Yeah, it could be just back to the secrecy and the compartmentalization of this whole process.
Doesn't want to make assumptions about whatever the hell he's seeing up there, because who knows what the possibilities could be for extraterrestrial medical equipment, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So jumping back in, after Lazar and Barry were allowed to examine the craft, it was time for this low-performance test flight. And when the test flight began, the craft started to like hiss loudly before it lifted off of the ground. And I think that's interesting because in a lot of, especially older cases like Flatwoods and things like that, we talk about these like hissing crafts and entities and whatnot. So I thought that was a strange little detail that I wanted to throw in there. But anyway, when this thing started lifting off the ground, it was like kind of unstable looking and wobbly as it was, going higher into the air. But as it lifted higher, it began to stabilize. And at that point, they could see like the strange blue glow coming from three kind of emitters on the bottom of the craft. And Lazar theorized that, quote, the air around the bottom of the craft, where we suspected the emitter was being broken down and photons were being emitted. So at that point, the craft continued to rise higher in the air. It got to a point like 30, 40 feet above the ground, and then it like descended and settled into place, and the test flight was over at that point. So do you have anything to add before we kind of close out the material for part one, Shane?
Just kind of like a thought, I guess. So theoretically, the assumption would be that there is some type of nuclear power that's involved with these ships. So
yeah,
theoretically, thinking off of that, these ships probably don't use any, power like how we imagine it. It's kind of like, it sustains itself. So what would the repercussions be of that if you're using something that's possibly nuclear, creating photons, whatever? I'm assuming that there's probably some type of like nuclear runoff to it, like nuclear radiation that comes off from it. So that idea goes into two different things.
Well, Bob said like this reactor and emitter is 100% clean, 100% efficient, like no leakage, nothing like that. So who knows?
Yeah, that makes it even crazier too to think that on the outside, there's people who've gotten like radiation burns from like these UFOs and stuff like that. So it's like, I don't know. It's just kind of a fascinating thing to think about, that if they are creating these nuclear power things and they are essentially burning clean, that just creates more of a reason why they'd have to potentially hide these things. But what I was going to try to get at is maybe you need a special type of person to be able to fly these things that would be able to sustain that type of stuff. But the other assumption would be that you need a special type of person to fly these things anyways, because something that moves that fast, like the humans interactions, and like you wouldn't be able to like think or move that fast. I feel like the only way that you'd be able to pilot this ship is if it was almost like attached to you at a certain point, where that starts getting into all of the weird stuff with them looking purposefully for people who are like, telekinetic and different things like that it almost be like you have to guess what's going to happen before it actually happens. And that'd be the only way that you'd potentially be able to like fly these ships. So it's like, theoretically, even if we were able to build these things, unless there's like a special type of person or we advance as a people, I don't think we could even potentially fly these things, because we wouldn't be able to think fast enough unless we could mentally attach ourselves to the ship. And even if you could do that, you'd still almost have to like see ahead of time in order to be able to do that, because it's like, if something's coming at you and you're moving at like the speed of light, it's like you have no time to be able to react to that unless it's like you're seeing that before it actually comes and happens. It's like, they're so fixated on the ship that it's like, even if you created it, it's like, who the fuck is going to fly this thing?
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about before, I feel like, as well, is this idea that these ships are almost piloted by like consciousness or, telekinesis or something like that. Like they're not getting behind the wheel of their spaceship and driving to Earth, so we just have to really, I feel like I say a lot of times, we have to open up our minds and just accept that there could be something far stranger going on here. And it could be, a mode of travel and a way of thinking about this that like is so beyond our earthly realm of thinking, but that doesn't mean that it's untrue,
So you remember Preston Dennett that we had on the show a very long time ago?
Yeah.
So
great guest.
He has been in talks with somebody named Dolly Saffron for a very long time, and it's maybe somebody that I could get to come on this show. She came on Inquiries a long time ago, but she's somebody who has been regularly I know she doesn't like using the term abducted because she has like good communications with these things, but she has made reference in contact with. That's probably a good way of wording it. But she's made references to the fact that basically the only way that you're able to fly these ships is like you have to like be connected with these ships. Like she was talking about a time when she was in connection and they basically asked her if she wanted to be able to try to fly the ship, and she essentially said like yeah, and as soon as she would like think about stuff, like the ship would shift and like move. So it was almost like she said it had to be connected to your mind in order to be able to work. So I'm not saying that is how it is, but I am saying that I've heard from multiple people who have had contact that claim that that's how it is.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, especially going to, what Bob said about there was no like navigation systems or no restraints or anything like that. So, I mean, if you are like mentally connected to the ship somehow and it's like this symbiotic, relationship, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, it helps to explain a lot of the, supposed issues with like interstellar travel.
I mean, theoretically speaking too, I mean, we're talking about the whole AI concept, and theoretically if AI became advanced enough to be able to, I don't want to say think for itself because it already kind of like problem solves at least, but like theoretically from like the human perspective, the only way I think that we'd be able to make these ships accessible for any military personnel would be if we theoretically got AI to a point of advancement where it's connected to the ship almost like in Star Trek, so to speak, and it can basically control the ship because it wouldn't need that like second to react because it would essentially be the ship itself in a weird way. It's almost like, creating consciousness to the ship, but taking away like the consciousness step in a way. It's like you almost need the ship to be aware of itself to a certain extent.
Its own organism almost.
Yeah, exactly. Which is something you definitely see through sci-fi in different contexts of like the ship being a living organism that they fly in, but you don't see the concept of them like building a ship and then like creating a consciousness into it very often. But when you do, it's like, it seems like it would theoretically work like Star Trek, like I was saying.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, it kind of, like you said, goes along with a lot of things we're talking about now about
advancing AI.
Yeah. And at what point does AI become conscious and what are the like long-term ramifications of that? So yeah, a lot to unpack there as well.
But I mean, that's where the split comes into, which I know I've talked about this a million times on the show, but in Star Trek, there's things like Data that are like fully conscious, aware, robotic, android-like beings. And then there's the things like the ship where they're AI, like they're conscious, they respond when you talk to them, but they're not like, they don't have emotion, they don't have feeling, like they're strictly used as like a tool, which is something that I'm always saying that we need to create that differentiation step where it's like, if you want a companion AI, that's one thing, but you also need to separate it and have these tool AIs where they don't have the emotion involved because when they try to add emotion to the ship, and they've done that a few times on Star Trek, the ship ends up taking control over itself and it ends up having a problem with the people. It's like you need it to be aware of itself, but not aware of itself that it becomes like, I don't want to say emotional,
dangerous.
but yeah, it becomes dangerous or has like emotions or like feelings for the way it is. It needs to simply become like a tool that's reactionary.
Yeah, the slippery slope there, though.
Yeah, very, very hard to differentiate. And even if you like did differentiate it, like who's to say that the ship may not find a way to, fix itself, so to speak. So, I mean,
absolutely.
All right, guys, this is our last break, so hold on tight.
And now back to the show. All right, so kind of closing out part one here. After Bob and Barry observed like this test flight and they got to see the craft up close, they felt that they had a better understanding of how the propulsion system worked. And Bob described this as, quote, "It worked to produce a kind of anti-gravity effect that would allow it to render our usual concepts of space and distance in material." So kind of like we were talking about earlier. So in short, Lazar kind of theorized that the propulsion system created like this highly focused anti-gravitational field that like removed, quote unquote, the gravitational forces surrounding the craft. So kind of like you were talking about with the whole dark matter Futurama thing. And this allowed it to accelerate and maneuver and travel these large distances extremely quickly. So that's kind of, where they thought they were going with their research. And they decided that their next course of action would be to construct some sort of device where they could more accurately measure like the gravitational effects that this thing produced and, try to go from there and reverse engineer it. However, after the night of this test flight, Lazar was not called back into work for several weeks. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
And we're going to talk about why next week in part 2. So, Shane, do you have anything to add? Any thoughts, theories, ideas, anything you want to add before we close out part 1?
I don't want to start diving too far into theories and ideas on this one, so I guess I'll save all of my continued thoughts for part 2 because I feel like I've put enough input in as we've been going through the episode. So,
yeah, definitely. I think we're going to have a lot to unpack in part 2, so you guys be sure to join us next week for that. And if you guys are interested in supporting the show and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, Shane, tell them what they can do.
First and foremost, you guys can go and check out our Patreon. Full access is only $2.50 a month, which is cheaper than a can of soda, cheaper than a bag of chips, and you guys can support the little guys in the process. And if you guys want to see what it's all about, there's a 7-day free trial available. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys will end up sticking around.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store with t-shirts starting at the bizarrely low and oddly specific price of just $15.68 plus shipping. Gee whiz.
Ooh. And I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, one of the best ways that you guys can do that is by leaving a review or rating for the show anywhere that you guys happen to listen to us. And Orin, what's the general rules for that?
1 and 5 stars only.
And with that, you will get our love and appreciation, or you'll get our ridicule. But either way, it'll be fun. So make sure you guys do that for us.
And you guys can also share the show with your friends and family and loved ones and anyone that you think would enjoy the show, or you can share it with your enemies that you think wouldn't enjoy the show. Either way, we don't give a shit. Just share the show.
Share the shit out of it. And if you guys want to be able to keep up to date on the show, one of the best ways that you guys can do that is how, Orin?
You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, and you just do all the internet things. You guys know how the internet works.
And you guys can also catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And if you guys have some free time, please check out and show some love to our awesome friends and sponsors of the show. We got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. And we got our buddy Joe with Cryptoteology for all your wearable cryptids.
And if you guys have a little bit more additional time, don't forget to check out our awesome friends with affiliate links. We got Dimension Devices if you guys want to pick up yourselves some paranormal investigating equipment. And we also got Sticker Mule if you guys need any t-shirts, stickers, anything like that for your podcast, local business, anything like that. Or you guys just want to get some random stickers made. And we also have some discounts and credits available for you guys for both of those. And more information on that is available down in the show description.
And as always, all the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like every single week, I have to remind you guys, because I'm afraid if I don't, you guys are going to start getting normal on me. So with all due respect, always, always, always stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
What in the hell is a zeta reticuli?